Diane Keaton, the embodiment of grace, wit, and authenticity in the world of cinema. The woman who gave us the free-spirited, eccentric, and deeply human Annie Hall, and who made the world smile again in Something's Gotta Give, passed away at the age of 79 on October 11, 2025, leaving behind an immeasurable sorrow in the hearts of admirers around the world. Yet behind the wide-brimmed hats, the radiant smile, and that unmistakable raspy laugh was a life marked more by solitude than splendor. Diane Keaton, the woman who made everyone laugh on screen, in real life never married, lived most of her life alone, and once confessed, "I fear being loved as much as I fear losing myself." For more than half a century, she was both an admired actress and a misunderstood woman. Not because of scandals, but because of the way she chose to live, truthfully, differently, and by no rules other than those of her own heart. She endured the quiet ache of a love lost with Al Pacino, the fear of youth slipping away in the mirror, and the profound emptiness that sometimes hides beneath the roar of applause. And yet, Diane Keaton never lost her light. She turned loneliness into style, fear into strength, and used her truthful performances to speak for an entire generation of women who had no words for their solitude. Now, as her life gently closes, the world does not simply mourn a Hollywood legend. It remembers a soul both beautiful in its clumsiness and strong in its fragility, a woman who lived and loved entirely on her own terms. If you loved Diane Keaton, leave a comment saying "Rip Diane Keaton" to share your condolences with her loved ones, and join us as we look back on her extraordinary journey, uncovering the untold truths, the hidden struggles, and the storm-filled path behind a life that once seemed so perfectly shining. When the news of Diane Keaton's passing spread across California that morning, Hollywood seemed to slow down for a heartbeat. On social media, on television, and across the still-lit sound stages, everyone spoke of her, not merely as an actress, but as a cultural soul. Bette Midler, her co-star in The First Wives Club, wrote on Instagram, "Diane Keaton, talented, beautiful, and extraordinary, has passed away. I can't put into words how deep this sadness feels. She was funny, original, and utterly guileless. What you saw was exactly who she was. Oh, la, la, la." Kimberly Williams Paisley, who played Keaton's daughter in Father of the Bride, shared, "Working with her was one of the most beautiful memories of my life. Thank you for your kindness, generosity, and above all, your laughter. Diane, you were special, and I'll never forget you." Steve Martin, who played her husband in the same film, didn't write much. He simply reposted an old interview clip with Martin Short. When asked, "Who's more charming, me or Steve Martin?" Keaton replied, "You're both idiots." Steve captioned it, "That was Diane, smart, funny, and never had to try to be lovable." Jane Fonda, her co-star in Book Club, wrote in a heartfelt tribute, "It's hard to believe or to accept that Diane is gone. She was always a spark of life, creative, witty, independent, and full of kindness. She was the only person who could turn awkwardness into grace and herself into art." Michael Douglas, who starred opposite her in And So It Goes, wrote, "One of the greatest icons of cinema has left us. Diane didn't just act. She made the world believe that honesty is the most beautiful thing of all." And Goldie Hawn, who stood beside her in The First Wives Club, offered the most tender farewell. "Diane, we weren't ready to lose you. You left us a trail of stardust, filled with light and memories. We'll miss you, you who taught the world that being different could be magical." From Viola Davis and Sarah Jessica Parker to Octavia Spencer, a chorus of stars echoed the same sentiment. Diane Keaton was not just an actress. She was a force, a redefinition of femininity itself. She didn't just inspire women, she liberated them. Octavia Spencer. And in the quiet moment, as Hollywood bid her farewell, people realized the light Diane Keaton brought into the world was never that of the stage or the camera. It was the radiance of a soul that never needed to compromise in order to be herself. And from that very light, her story, from a rebellious youth to her serene later years, begins to unfold once more. Los Angeles, the winter of 1946. In a small suburban house where the lights burned through the night, a baby girl was born, Diane Hall. Her father was a practical, reserved construction engineer. Her mother, Dorothy Keaton Hall, was a beautiful, graceful woman carrying within her a quiet dream of artistry, a dream that had never been allowed to speak its name. Their family was the picture of post-war America, Catholic, disciplined, and devoted to the belief that a woman's happiness was found in keeping the kitchen warm and the house spotless. Then one day, Dorothy entered the Mrs. Los Angeles pageant. Diane was only 8 years old, sitting in the audience with wide eyes as she watched her mother step into the spotlight. Confident, radiant, and for a brief moment, free from every invisible limit that had bound her life. Dorothy won the crown, thanks to her perfect chocolate cake and impeccable home. But to young Diane, the real victory was something else. She saw for the first time the woman her mother could have been, a writer, an artist, anyone she wanted to be. Yet the light faded quickly. A few hours later, the crowned woman returned to her kitchen, her apron, and a life where dreams were carefully folded away in drawers. Diane loved that image and feared it. In her child's eyes, something about it felt terribly wrong. How could a woman shine so brightly one moment, only to disappear into domestic silence the next? That question became a vow. Long before she was Diane Keaton, the little girl named Diane Hall swore she would not live that way. She would not vanish. She would not let her dreams be caged by what the world called feminine virtue. Even if it meant giving up love, marriage, or the world's approval, she would choose herself. And that was the beginning of a lifetime of quiet rebellion. Born, not out of anger, but out of the harsh lessons of a little girl who had seen what it meant for a woman's light to be dimmed. Manhattan, late 1960s. The bright lights of Broadway reflected on the face of a young woman who had just left California, Diane Hall. Her name was too common. When she joined the Actors Equity Association, she discovered there was already another Diane Hall on the list. Without hesitation, she chose her mother's maiden name, Keaton. I'll be the only one chosen. It was her first declaration, from a woman who would spend her entire life doing everything her own way. 1968, in the whirlwind of the hippie movement, anti-war protests, and the rise of personal liberation, Diane Keaton stepped onto the stage of Hair, the musical that shook America. When the cast agreed to appear nude in the finale, she refused. She didn't protest loudly, she simply said, "I'm not doing that, not because I'm afraid, but because it's not me." A young woman daring to say no in an era where everyone was shouting freedom. They called her eccentric, never realizing that this, her quiet defiance, was freedom in its purest form. But freedom always comes at a price. To keep her role, she was pressured to lose weight to the point of obsession. In the years that followed, Diane fought silently against bulimia and the haunting image of the body the stage wanted, not the one she lived in. What she didn't know was that somewhere in the audience sat a small, bespectacled man, studying her every move, Woody Allen. A year later, Keaton auditioned for Play It Again, Sam, the play written by and starring Allen. During the audition, she stumbled over her lines, laughed nervously at herself, and somehow made the entire room laugh with her. And in that instant, Diane discovered something profound, that a trembling voice could be its own kind of power. Her vulnerability made her real, and that truth made Allen unable to look away. Diane won the role, and a Tony nomination. Not long after, their first dinner together marked the beginning of a new chapter, one that was both a tender romance and a creative partnership that would last for years. Woody Allen found in Diane Keaton something he had never found in any other actress: a strange, luminous soul, witty, fragile, and unafraid to be both. In 1972, Francis Ford Coppola cast her as Kay Adams in The Godfather. The same girl who once said no on a Broadway stage now stood in one of the greatest film sets in cinematic history. The spotlight no longer shone on her. It lifted her, placing her exactly where she belonged. From that moment on, American cinema found a new kind of voice: quiet, authentic, and utterly unforgettable. Though she had only just begun her journey in film with a few small roles, Diane Keaton quickly proved she was no ordinary actress. She never tried to please anyone, never tailored herself to fit expectations, and never sought to be liked. But it was precisely that non-conformity that made the great directors take notice of her, especially Francis Ford Coppola. During the casting process for The Godfather, Coppola saw something in Diane that others didn't: a quietly compelling unease, a feminine softness with an inner strength, the perfect emotional counterpoint to Michael Corleone. Though Keaton was unknown in Hollywood and dismissed by many as too odd, Coppola personally invited her to play Kay Adams. It was a controversial choice, but time proved him right. The Godfather didn't just immortalize Marlon Brando, Al Pacino, or Robert Duvall. Beneath the world of power, blood, and betrayal, Diane Keaton became the human heartbeat of the film, a gentle face in the storm, the only woman brave enough to love a man incapable of love. When The Godfather premiered in 1972, it became an instant cultural phenomenon. But it was in The Godfather Part 2, 1974, that Keaton's portrayal of Kay truly exploded. She returned as the wife once promised a normal life, and betrayed by the very man who made that promise. No action sequences, no grand monologues, no central spotlight. Yet every time she appeared, audiences could feel the one thing that World of Gangsters lacked most: the loss of a soul. One of the film's most haunting scenes comes when Kay confesses she has aborted her child, not for her own health, but because she didn't want to bring another life into your world. That line shattered more than a marriage. It shattered faith itself. And when Michael silently closed the door in her face, the entire world of The Godfather fell into darkness. A moment that needed no gunfire, only a glance and a breathless silence. In that silence, Diane Keaton became the emotional metronome of an empire built on ruin. The Godfather Part 2 not only won critical acclaim, but rewrote cinematic history. 6 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Director, Coppola, Best Supporting Actor, Robert De Niro, along with Best Screenplay, Score, and Art Direction. Roger Ebert called it a tragic American masterpiece. Time and Empire gave it near-perfect scores. With a modest $13 million budget, the film grossed over $93 million, an extraordinary sum for its time, and was later ranked the 32 on the AFI list of the 100 greatest American films. From The Sopranos to Breaking Bad and Succession, The Godfather Part 2 became the gold standard for every story about power and corruption. And Diane Keaton? Though not the center of the narrative, she was called the quiet linchpin, the unseen hinge that kept the saga from collapsing into a heartless epic. Kay Adams was the only person in that world who dared to say no to Michael Corleone, to walk away, even as her heart bled. That courage made Diane Keaton, the 5'9" tall, eccentric, outspoken woman, an irreplaceable part of one of Hollywood's greatest masterpieces. When The Godfather Part 3 premiered in 1990, Keaton once again returned as Kay, now older, wiser, and far less idealistic. 2 decades had passed, and Kay was no longer the young woman standing outside the Corleone empire, but the only one left with the courage to question it, to cling to the remnants of humanity in a world long lost to ambition. Yet unlike its predecessors, Part 3 did not receive the same universal praise. Despite commercial success, $136 million worldwide from a $54 million budget and 7 Oscar nominations, it divided critics. Some called it ambitious but hollow. The New York Times described it as a beautiful but unfinished painting. Roger Ebert called its finale poignant but missing the mythic punch. Even Keaton's performance was labeled by Time as invisible, the wife forever standing outside the power game. But look closer, and that invisibility becomes the point. In a world of men consumed by blood and dominance, Kay remains the last trace of what they've lost: love, decency, truth. She wasn't a feminist icon in the conventional sense, but simply by existing, calm, unapologetic, needing no validation, Diane Keaton left an echo all her own. And if The Godfather was America's great tragedy, written in power, betrayal, and sacrifice, then Diane Keaton, through 3 decades, was its final heartbeat of humanity. If The Godfather was her launchpad, then Annie Hall was the moment Diane Keaton was truly defined. The film didn't just earn her an Academy Award, it forced Hollywood to rethink what a leading lady could be. No longer the beautiful shadow behind a man, but the woman who changes him. At first, Annie Hall didn't look anything like a masterpiece. Its original title was Anhedonia, meaning the inability to feel pleasure. The first cut ran over 150 minutes, messy, over-intellectual, and so disconnected that co-writer Marshall Brickman sighed. "This movie can't be saved." But Woody Allen and his editors did the unthinkable. They cut more than half, stripped the film down to its core, and kept only what truly lived: the relationship between Alvy and Annie. From a long, tangled draft emerged 93 minutes of pure, honest emotion, perhaps the most alive film Allen would ever make. The shoot took nearly 10 months, with countless scenes rewritten, reshot, or abandoned altogether. Moments like the philosophical basketball game and the cello doctor were tossed out to make room for simplicity. Because Allen finally understood, love doesn't need philosophy, only truth. The story between Alvy and Annie, between a man afraid to love and a woman brave enough to, became a gentle symphony of modern life, where humor and loneliness intertwine. The film premiered in April 1977. No flashy marketing, no grand campaign. And yet Annie Hall held the #1 spot at the US box office for 3 straight weeks. With a modest $4 million budget, it grossed over $38 million, nearly $200 million today, a number even Woody Allen hadn't imagined. That year, it ranked 7th among the highest-grossing domestic films, surpassing several action blockbusters that cost many times more. Then came Oscar night. No one believed a quirky romantic comedy, with no special effects and little melodrama, could possibly beat Star Wars. But it did. Annie Hall swept 4 major Academy Awards: Best Picture, Best Director, Best Original Screenplay, and Best Actress for Diane Keaton. It also won 5 BAFTAs, a Golden Globe, and was named Film of the Year by the National Society of Film Critics. Roger Ebert hailed it as a modern masterpiece of romantic comedy. And Diane Keaton, with her loose vest, crooked tie, awkward grin, and eyes that seemed both foolish and fathomless, did what no one had dared before. She made awkwardness iconic. In a decade obsessed with perfection, Keaton stepped onto the screen trembling, stammering, heartbreakingly real. So real that audiences forgot they were watching a movie. From that moment, a new kind of woman was born on screen. Free, intelligent, imperfect, and lovable precisely because of it. It was no longer Woody Allen's Annie Hall. It was Diane Keaton. And Hollywood would never be the same again. But perhaps the film's greatest influence didn't come from its dialogue. It came from its wardrobe. Diane Keaton didn't follow the costume notes. She brought her own clothes, her real-life style, into the role. Oversized shirts, wide-leg trousers, vests, loose ties, and fedora hats. Woody Allen initially objected. He worried the chaos would ruin the film's visual harmony. But Keaton simply smiled. "I don't dress to seduce. I dress to be myself." Allen, who understood the allure of authenticity better than anyone, relented. Some pieces came from Ralph Lauren, but the combinations were entirely Keaton's invention. No rules, no makeup perfection, no 70s silhouettes, just Diane, spontaneous and unapologetically her, and the world fell in love with it. The Annie Hall look became a phenomenon. Masculine blazers, puffy shirts, wide trousers, creative layering, women dressing like men, all exploded after the film, spreading from New York to Europe. Fashion magazines crowned Keaton the icon of effortless style. Designers like Ralph Lauren, Donna Karan, and Yves Saint Laurent later admitted that Annie Hall reshaped the direction of women's fashion in the late 1970s. Millions of women stopped dressing to please others and began dressing to feel free in their own skin. But that look was only the surface. Beneath the vest and fedora was a character written for Diane Keaton not just on paper, but in spirit. Annie Hall, a smart, sensitive woman with dreams of singing, forever caught between freedom and the fear of being hurt. Not sensual in the Hollywood sense, not perfect like a magazine cover. Yet every time she stammered, laughed awkwardly, or quietly walked away from love, audiences saw themselves. Diane Keaton didn't play Annie Hall. She lived her. And because of that, Annie Hall became more than a film. It became a cultural turning point, a silent revolution that changed how Hollywood saw women. From then on, Diane Keaton was no longer the eccentric actress who played Kay Adams. She was the face of a new kind of heroine, smart, complex, imperfect, and above all, unapologetically herself. After Annie Hall, Diane Keaton refused to be boxed into a single mold. She avoided repetition, turning down the kind of charming, quirky female lead roles audiences expected from her. Instead, she moved into deeper, more fragile territories, places where emotions, memory, and pain collided like shards of glass. In 1981, Keaton reunited with Warren Beatty in Reds, a sweeping historical epic about American journalist John Reed. As Louise Bryant, she portrayed a woman torn between idealism and love, between the hunger for recognition and the loneliness of living beside greatness. The role earned Diane her third Oscar nomination, but more importantly, it revealed an emotional strength and vulnerability few could reach. Beatty once said, "No one but Diane could be so strong and so fragile at the same time." Nearly 2 decades later, Keaton made audiences weep again in Marvin's Room, 1996, co-starring Meryl Streep and Leonardo DiCaprio. She played a daughter who quietly cares for her ailing father and her dying sister, burdened yet filled with love. That performance earned her another Oscar nomination, not for technical mastery, but for her honesty, a gentleness so real it couldn't be taught, only lived. That same year, she created another kind of legend in The First Wives Club, the sharp, funny story of 3 middle-aged women, Keaton, Goldie Hawn, Bette Midler, reclaiming their voices after heartbreak. The film was humorous, yet biting. But what made it timeless was its living, breathing feminism, not shouted, but felt. Keaton became the symbol of women who dared to start over, unapologetic about age, unafraid to love again. By the time she turned 50, Hollywood had quietly closed its doors to most actresses her age. But Diane Keaton opened another one. In Something's Gotta Give, 2003, she starred opposite Jack Nicholson as a single playwright, witty, vulnerable, yet radiant in her own way. The film grossed over $265 million worldwide, won Keaton a Golden Globe, and earned her another Oscar nomination. But its greatest triumph was the message it carried. Women over 50 can still be the center of the story, of love, desire, and their own lives. From the eccentric girl of Annie Hall, Diane Keaton had become one of America's most multifaceted actresses, never chasing trends, never performing for approval, but always showing up where truth lived. Yet Diane Keaton was never just an actress. She was a storyteller, in every form she touched. In 1995, she directed Unstrung Heroes, a small, tender, and beautifully human film that earned critical acclaim. Though she didn't remain behind the camera for long, it revealed Diane's deep sensitivity, her gift for finding poetry in loneliness and turning it into art. Off-screen, she wandered the streets for hours with her camera in hand. She photographed old houses, peeling walls, forgotten corners of the city. It wasn't a hobby. It was a ritual of silence, a way to preserve stillness in a world too loud with men's voices. Each photograph was, in a way, a love letter to her mother, the woman who once dreamed of being an artist, but chose family instead. Perhaps every time Diane lifted her camera, she was living the life her mother never got to live. She was also obsessed with architecture. For years, Keaton personally restored Spanish colonial-style mansions across California. No architects, no consultants, just her own patient, meticulous vision. She would rebuild them, then sell them for millions, not for profit, but for the quiet joy of turning ruin into beauty. In 2012, she published her memoir, Then Again. Not to recount fame, but to speak to her late mother. It reads like a conversation between two women from different eras, one who chose family and one who chose freedom. There is no noise, no bitterness, only gentle irony, deep gratitude, and love. The New York Times called it a beautiful letter between generations, where Diane Keaton tells the story of being a woman without ever asking permission. And of course, Diane remained one of Hollywood's most unexpected fashion icons. She never tried to be stylish. She simply showed up on red carpets wearing wide trousers, oversized blazers, loose ties, and her signature fedora, as if she'd never cared what was in. But it was precisely that disregard, that honesty, that became the very definition of style. The Annie Hall look turned into a worldwide trend. Ralph Lauren, Donna Karan, even Giorgio Armani drew inspiration from her. People began to call Diane Keaton the woman who never asked permission to be different. Few know this, but Diane once dreamed of being a singer. In the 1970s, she recorded several jazz numbers, lent her voice to the musical Hair, and even began work on her own solo album in 1977. The project never came to fruition, and yet, if you listen closely to Diane Keaton's voice, raspy, low, and trembling with warmth, you realize she had been singing her whole life just without the music. From Kay Adams to Annie Hall, from Louise Bryant to Erica Barry, from filmmaker to photographer, Diane Keaton proved that a woman can live dozens of lives without ever losing herself. And perhaps that is her greatest success of all. Now, as Diane Keaton's name fades across the front pages of October 11, 2025, the world returns to the things that truly defined her. Not the films, not the golden statues, but the moments she loved, broke, and walked through alone. Throughout her life, Diane Keaton had several romances with brilliant men, Woody Allen, Warren Beatty, but none touched her heart as deeply as Al Pacino. They met for the first time on the set of The Godfather, 1971. Diane, 25 at the time, was immediately drawn to Pacino. She called him a lost soul, mysterious, distant, magnetic in a way that made it impossible for her to look away. From those early days on set, between the whir of cameras and the scent of gunpowder in the air, they began a relationship that defied definition. No public appearances, no photos, no red carpets, just two people quietly finding each other in a world neither of them truly belonged to. For me, she once admitted, the Godfathers were about Al, not about fame, not about roles, but about the man who became the emotional center of her life. When The Godfather Part 3 began filming nearly 20 years later, both Diane and Al were single. She believed, perhaps, life was offering them one last chance. "I wanted him to marry me. I wanted a commitment," she told him plainly. But Al Pacino said nothing. No promise, no refusal, only a distant look, cold and uncertain, like the character he was playing. And when the film wrapped, so did their love. Not with a goodbye, but with silence. Diane Keaton fell apart afterward. She began to doubt herself, her worth, her aging reflection. "I didn't feel beautiful anymore. I didn't feel desirable," she confessed years later in a painfully honest interview. The feeling of being left behind sent her spiraling back into old habits, uncontrollable eating followed by purging, a cycle of physical pain and emotional emptiness. And then, in time, she let him go. No resentment, no bitterness, just truth spoken after the pain had cooled. The love ended on an unfinished proposal, but its mark never faded. Diane Keaton never married. She chose a life of her own, a single mother to two children surrounded by photographs, houses, and memory. She didn't avoid loneliness. She tamed it, turned it into her companion. Now, when people remember her, there is no trace of regret, only the image of a woman who once loved completely, broke deeply, and still stood tall, needing no rescue, no witness. Diane Keaton once said, "I've never had a perfect love, but I've had a perfect life." And perhaps, at 79, with all the lights dimmed, she finally found peace in the stillness she had searched for all her life. But Al Pacino wasn't the only man who left a lasting mark on her heart. Before him there was another, quieter, more complicated, yet just as profound, Woody Allen. They met when both were young and struggling in New York's theater scene. Allen wrote, Keaton performed. They lived in cramped apartments, shared canned dinners, and talked about scripts until midnight. There were no grand confessions, only the quiet connection of two misfits who understood each other in a world that didn't. Keaton admitted she had feelings for Allen, though it was never clear what we were. It wasn't a romance, not officially, but it was a bond that never went away. At the time, Diane was also battling her own demons, bulimia, the endless war between control and collapse, a struggle Allen knew nothing about. Years later, he recalled, half-jokingly, but with regret, "I thought she just had a healthy appetite. If I'd known she wasn't keeping any of it down, I wouldn't have taken her to such expensive restaurants." That was Woody's way of speaking about Diane. With irony, tenderness, and a quiet affection he never quite said aloud. Their relationship never had a label, but it became something else entirely: art. Allen wrote Annie Hall for her, a character that was essentially her reflection, intelligent, neurotic, endearing, and impossible to imitate. Together they created one of the most defining films of the 1970s, a work that earned Diane her first Oscar and forever redefined what a woman on screen could be. After that, they worked together less often, but they were never strangers. What existed between Diane Keaton and Woody Allen was a kind of strange kinship. No longer lovers, but never merely friends. In 1993, when Allen became embroiled in his explosive custody scandal with Mia Farrow, he was preparing to shoot Manhattan Murder Mystery. The lead female role had originally been written for Farrow, but when the controversy broke, the project nearly collapsed. The first person he called was Diane Keaton. She said yes immediately. Not for the role, not for money, but because he was someone who had once mattered to her deeply. At a time when the industry was turning its back on him, Diane quietly walked onto the set, stood beside him, and offered her presence, just as she had decades earlier when they were young and unguarded. No statement, no defense, just loyalty in its simplest, purest form. To her, it wasn't an act of bravery. It was instinct, born of honesty and kindness. Woody Allen had once written a part of Diane Keaton's life into existence, and in his stormiest days, she answered him not with words but with silent solidarity. Some connections, she seemed to believe, may fade in color, but never truly disappear. Before her long, unfulfilled love story with Al Pacino, Diane Keaton had a brief, quieter romance with Warren Beatty, her co-star in Reds, 1981. At the time, Beatty was Hollywood's golden man, handsome, charming, and as famous for his list of lovers as for his career. Keaton, with her candid humor and unpolished individuality, later admitted with disarming honesty, "I loved Warren. Who wouldn't?" But charisma alone couldn't bridge the distance between two strong-willed souls. They were too smart, too independent, too self-contained to survive each other for long. The relationship ended quietly. No scandal, no bitterness, just a short chapter in the lives of two people mature enough to understand their limits. Nearly 2 decades later, in the late 2000s, Diane Keaton again stirred the tabloids, this time with Keanu Reeves, her co-star nearly 30 years her junior in Something's Gotta Give, 2003. On screen, Reeves played a young doctor who falls for an older woman, and audiences couldn't believe the chemistry was only acting. They were seen dining together a few times, attending events side by side, and soon rumors of a romance spread like wildfire, neither confirmed nor denied. And in the end, it faded, quietly, almost poetically, as if the ambiguity itself was the answer. Among all the names that brushed against her life, Warren Beatty, Woody Allen, Keanu Reeves, only one left a permanent mark: Al Pacino. "I've always been drawn to complicated men," she once said, "but only once in my life did I love someone so much I wanted them to choose me, and they didn't." There was no bitterness in her voice, only acceptance. The calm wisdom of a woman who had loved deeply, lost gracefully, and kept moving forward in her own way. The loves that passed through Diane's life didn't leave scars. They left ellipses, quiet pauses where affection ended not in anger, but in silence. By the time she reached her 60s, Diane joked to reporters, "I never thought seriously about marrying any of them. I didn't want to give up my independence, and none of them ever proposed, so I guess that's the simplest answer." She laughed, but there was always something hushed behind the laughter. For Diane Keaton, independence wasn't a choice. It was an instinct. The fear of confinement had lived in her since childhood, since the day she watched her mother, Dorothy Keaton Hall, give up her artistic dreams to become a wife and mother, slowly disappearing behind the kitchen door. "I'm afraid of living with someone," she once said bluntly. That fear, intertwined with her unwavering devotion to freedom, kept her standing just outside every relationship, not because she feared love, but because she understood something few ever do, that sometimes freedom itself is a form of love. There was one event that completely changed the way Diane Keaton viewed family: her father's death. After that loss, for the first time in her life, the woman who once vowed she would never let anyone move into my house found herself wanting to care for someone. At 50, she made a decision she'd never imagined: to become a single mother. "It was the most humbling experience I've ever had," she said, her voice carrying equal parts pride and disbelief. In 1996, Diane adopted her first child, a daughter named Dexter. 5 years later, at 55, she welcomed her son, Duke. No marriage, no partner, just a mother and her 2 children, together, redefining what a family could be. "I used to think I needed a stable relationship before becoming a mother," she shared, "but that never happened, and I realized I'd wasted too many years just waiting. Eventually, Diane understood that she didn't need to wait for anyone to begin loving. Dexter, her eldest, stayed away from Hollywood. She chose a quiet life, graduated from the University of Arizona, and married Jordan White in October 2021. At the wedding, Diane wore her signature white suit, not to draw attention, but to blend into the celebration. She didn't want to be the famous actress. She wanted to be the mother of the bride, and later a grandmother. Today, Dexter lives privately, occasionally sharing glimpses of her family on her Instagram account, mirrors white noise, and she continues to appear beside her mother at special moments, such as Diane's handprint ceremony at the TCL Chinese Theater, where mother and daughter stood side by side, hands clasped tightly, closing one chapter and opening another. Duke, her youngest, also lives far from the spotlight. He loves photography, fascinated by light, shadow, and the quiet beauty of small details, just like his mother. Diane once said that when she watched Duke behind a camera, she saw the young girl she used to be still alive within him, the part of her that learned to love simplicity, stillness, and truth. "Becoming a mother at 50 was something I never imagined," she once said, "but maybe everything really does happen at the right time. No regrets about not marrying, no regrets about being different." Diane Keaton redefined what family meant. No templates, no expectations, only real love. And of course, she kept her trademark wit intact. In one interview, when asked about dating, Diane laughed and said, "I never sleep with anyone twice, unless they have a dog." What sounded like a joke was, in truth, the perfect summary of Diane Keaton. Independent, humorous, unafraid of solitude, and endlessly turning her differences into joy. Throughout her life, Diane Keaton remained one of Hollywood's most beautiful paradoxes, eccentric yet graceful, unpredictable yet genuine. But behind that elegance were habits that startled even her admirers. There was a period when she drank up to 25 bottles of wine a week, mostly in the mornings. She never denied it or romanticized it. She simply said, "It was part of my rhythm." Eventually, she quit, but continued to speak about it honestly, as a reminder that she had never tried to appear perfect. Off-screen, Keaton spent years buying and restoring old Spanish colonial houses across California, personally choosing every brick, every paint color, every piece of furniture. And yet, strangely, she rarely stayed in one place for long. Those homes were metaphors for her life, always rebuilding, reinventing, never settling. Her personal style was no different. Men's suits, bowler hats, loose ties, white gloves, all became her signature, her quiet rebellion against the world's idea of femininity. "I dress for myself," she said, "not for anyone else." And for decades, Diane Keaton stayed true to that promise, living proof that freedom, once chosen, can be the most elegant form of grace. Diane Keaton never needed fashion to draw attention. She made fashion revolve around her. But the most controversial chapter of her later life had nothing to do with clothes or roles. It was about loyalty. After Dylan Farrow's essay reignited allegations of sexual abuse against Woody Allen, many in Hollywood severed all ties with him. Diane Keaton did not. She openly defended her longtime friend, the man who had written Annie Hall, the role that won her the Oscar. She continued to call him "my best friend." She sang to him at his American Film Institute tribute, and when questioned about her stance, she replied simply, "People have the right to judge, and I have the right to keep my faith." Woody Allen, in an interview with the Daily Beast, spoke of her with unmistakable affection. "I'm very close to her. We still talk. We see each other when we can. I'd love to work with her again." He admitted that Diane had changed, busier now with children, books, television projects, and the quiet work of simply living, but added, If a good role came along, she'd say yes in a heartbeat, and I couldn't be happier. And indeed, Alan was right. Diane Keaton kept working almost to the end of her life. In one of her final interviews, she joked that if a movie's budget was tight, all it needed was one romantic scene with Ryan Gosling, Bradley Cooper, or Clint Eastwood. And boom, instant box office appeal. It was a line both witty and liberating, the humor of a woman who no longer had anything to prove, only the joy of still doing what she loved. Diane Keaton never lived to please expectations, and she never apologized for it. She chose not to marry. She chose to become a mother at 50. She chose to stand by Woody Allen during the storm of Me Too. For some, that was courage. For others, contradiction. But for Diane, it was simply honesty, the quiet consistency of someone who refused to betray herself even when the world demanded she take a side. Now that she is gone, the question still lingers. Can a woman be strong, eccentric, and loyal to her past, and still inspire the present? Diane Keaton never answered that with words. She answered it with her life. No one in Hollywood ever made awkwardness look so elegant or eccentricity feel so iconic as Diane Keaton. For more than half a century, she wasn't just an actress, she was a way of being, candid, independent, and utterly unwilling to live by anyone else's definition of what a woman should be. From Annie Hall to Something's Gotta Give, Diane Keaton embodied characters that defied Hollywood's molds, women who were both strong and vulnerable, rational yet deeply emotional, brave enough to love and brave enough to walk away. She showed audiences that imperfection, too, can be a kind of strength. Throughout her extraordinary career, Diane Keaton received nearly every honor an actor could dream of. One Academy Award for Annie Hall, 1977, 2 Golden Globes, 2 BAFTA Awards, and multiple Emmy and Tony nominations. In 2017, the American Film Institute, AFI, presented her with its Lifetime Achievement Award, recognizing not only her cinematic legacy, but also her indelible mark on modern culture. That evening, Woody Allen, Steve Martin, and Al Pacino were all there. 3 men, utterly different from one another, yet united by a single truth. They had all loved Diane Keaton, been captivated by her, and ultimately admitted that none of them ever fully understood her. They didn't speak merely of talent, but of presence, of style, spirit, and unwavering authenticity. She was the woman who walked her own road, even if she had to walk it alone. But Diane Keaton's influence stretched far beyond the screen. She was a photographer, an architectural preservationist, a best-selling author, and a woman who redefined what success could mean. No husband, no mold, no permission, just an honest life, fully lived. In a Hollywood obsessed with youth, beauty, and predictability, Diane Keaton became the beautiful contradiction, imperfect yet powerful, singular yet kind. She never tried to be an icon, and yet she became the embodiment of freedom, authenticity, and self-acceptance. Now, as her name fades into history, her image will remain eternal. The fedora hat, the crisp white suit, the shy, knowing smile, and a spirit that no one will ever replicate. Diane Keaton didn't just inspire women. She set them free. In her final years, Diane Keaton lived quietly in a sunlit home in Los Angeles, surrounded by her beloved dogs and a garden overflowing with light, a space shaped by serenity and the natural order she had spent her entire life seeking. Cream-colored walls, red-tiled roofs, wide windows opening to the California sun, every detail restored by her own hands, from the bricks to the garden corners, as if she were writing her final chapter not with words, but with architecture. Even nearing 80, Diane never truly stopped, and Hollywood never stopped looking back at her. In 2024, she appeared in Summer Camp and Arthur's Whiskey, 2 gentle yet profound comedies about middle age, mirroring the quiet wisdom and humor of her own spirit. Though neither film aimed for box office glory, They reminded audiences why Diane Keaton remained irreplaceable. Charming, eccentric, and radiantly alive, proof that age is never a boundary for freedom. Outside of acting, she continued her lifelong passion for architecture restoration. Her Spanish colonial-style mansion in Los Angeles, redesigned entirely by her, went on the market for nearly $29 million, drawing attention for its classic beauty and unmistakably Diane Keaton warmth. Unique yet welcoming, elegant yet humble. On social media, she remained astonishingly present. Nearly 3 million followers on Instagram, not to promote, but to share joy. Short clips of spontaneous dancing, snapshots of her children, sunlight filtering through leaves, or simply a fedora resting on a table. With silver hair, a free smile, and mischievous eyes that never aged, she didn't adapt to the times. The times adapted to her. On October 11, 2025, Diane Keaton passed away peacefully in her sleep at her home in California. No announcement, no spectacle, just as she had lived, gentle, independent, and real until the very end. They say the most beautiful light is the light of late afternoon, warm, soft, and true. Diane Keaton was that light for Hollywood, not blinding in its brilliance, but lasting, glowing quietly, eternally, in the hearts of all who saw it. The lights have dimmed, but that smile remains, in every frame, in every memory of those who loved her. The life of Diane Keaton was a declaration of freedom, gentle, independent, and unflinchingly honest to the very end. She never chased the times, because it was the times that had to learn to keep up with her. Now, beneath the California sun, in the home she once called her sanctuary, only silence lingers after the laughter. The most beautiful legacy Diane Keaton could have left behind. Perhaps she never needed anyone to complete her because she herself was the definition of completeness. What do you remember most about Diane Keaton? Share your thoughts below, because sometimes the way we remember someone is the way they live on forever. And if you cherish stories like this, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so we can continue honoring the legends who built Hollywood.